welcome to Today in Space. I am your space science podcast host from the East Coast, Alex G. Arfanos, and today we are back for another segment of People of Science, where we talk to people with STEM backgrounds who work in STEM, worked in STEM. Their passion comes from the STEM background, and we talk about their origin story. And this week, we're very lucky to have James Maynard on the podcast, the Cosmic Companion podcast. This is the first space or science podcast person that we've had on the podcast. So, James, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Alex. It's really wonderful.
It's great to have you here. I would love for you to give the folks a little bit of brief about you and who you are, what you do, and then we'll dive into your STEM origin story if you don't mind.
Sure. I have dedicated my professional life to tearing down barriers to science education. I want to make science education available to everyone. And I want to tear down the barriers of understanding. I want to tear down the barriers of cost. I want to tear down the barriers of interest. And I want to create systems for the 21st century that bring science education to people, even if they don't know they want to learn.
Love that. Powerful.
Thank
That's
you.
amazing. I love that mission statement. How's it going? This is a crazy time for that breakdown of traditional education.
Oh my goodness, it's so crazy and it's so wonderful. I mean, all the new technologies that are coming out now, and I mean, we are really witnessing a birth. I think, is the birth we're seeing now of I think is going to be possibly even larger than the introduction of the internet,
Yeah,
its
absolutely.
impact on our race.
Yeah, this year, this 2023, so this will be our first episode of 2023. So this is like perfect because AI is one of the things in our 2020 review that I really want to break down in 2023 to, take the complex of it and try and give it as like a practical, like what is it doing today and what could it change for you tomorrow and in, even the next year.
Absolutely.
Is there anything
Absolutely.
right now that excites you that people should pay attention to or they might have already heard of?
Oh man, I mean, is there anything happening now that doesn't excite me? I think I think that would be a much shorter list. I mean, I love the idea and the concepts and the opportunities provided by text to photos as
Mm,
well as text to larger, more text. I mean, like
yeah.
ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
That is just remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunities for that are just unknown at this point. I remember, and of course, I'm going to start off by saying I don't remember. I believe it was Faraday, who was asked by the Queen at his time, of what use is electricity.
Mm.
And he's reported to have said, Madam, of what use is a newborn baby?
Oh,
Right. You know, but what the power of AI when combined with 3D environments, with metaverses, social networking, um, with
yeah.
blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
the, it's like the world's largest Tinker toy.
Yeah. I think people have a hard time, and myself included. I'm no by no means an expert, but I've definitely been paying attention to it. I kind of grasp some of the concepts, and with making content online, automation and taking the workload off yourself is huge, and being able to do more, be more creative. That's kind of how I see that's the value I'm looking for in AI for myself is how does it free me up to be more creative,
Yes.
or do the things that I really want to be focusing on. Kind of like in a Star Trek model. Like Star Trek is the era after the automation and the systems have kind of done most of the work for us. Everyday jobs don't matter anymore, and you can focus on being the best human being. And that gap between now and then, I don't think most people are even thinking about, and so it's scary. And so the one thing that I hope to do here on the podcast is like not make this stuff magic. So if there's a topic that's starting to sound like magic, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the engineering, the science, and make it
Mm-hmm.
something that you can understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important in, so many things. And I think a lot of people's reticence towards science can be traced to them thinking it's magic.
Yeah.
They hear, some story comes out about a planet which isn't horrible, an
Yeah.
exoplanet, which might have a few things going for it as far as,
Mm-hmm.
life is concerned. And then that gets reprinted into, um, popular newspaper articles saying
Mm-hmm.
habitable planet found 40 light years away, and then when someone comes along and says, hey, look, habitable is relative here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what can happen, and that life probably isn't, you know there's not, big flying saucers coming from there. Hate to break it to you
Right.
guys.
Right.
Then people, like many people, too many people think, oh wow, this is science changing its mind,
Mm.
which which is and can be one of the most powerful aspects of science.
Yeah.
But but when what is being said is misunderstood, it
Mm.
can be perceived by a lot of people as seeming like magic.
Yeah.
And then when it's disproven, then far too many people see scientists as charlatans.
Right.
And I think that's a real danger right there.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what I'll speak for myself, but I'm going to guess for yourself as well is,
Mm,
being a person that will actually communicate that and break it down because not to any scientist's fault that, I could definitely see people were doing science and engineering and then there were other people that were communicating it. They probably weren't for a long time scientifically minded folks or people that cared about the nuance of using one word or the other. So it's a situation we find ourselves in that's accelerating quickly because of how fast stuff moves on the internet, and
mm,
if we don't pick up that mantle, no one's gonna do it. It's just gonna keep filtering into you know clickbait articles and stuff like that, and we'll lose the actual information.
right, right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you see AI as a way to combat that type of thing? Because I think a lot of folks might look at that and think, oh, it's going to be more of the same.
I think it's probably a two-edged sword. I
Mm,
mean, yeah, I think it could be used responsibly or irresponsibly.
I love that.
If you're, I'm sure there'll be plenty of media organizations, firing their $15 an hour, you know, writers in order to
Right.
have everything written by AI.
Yeah.
But it can also be used in by writers to, like you said, to become more creative
Mm,
and to be used within larger projects. Like, all right, like right now, I'm working on the episode of the show of the Cosmic Companion, which talks about what space habitations may look like in the future when we've been comfortably there for a while. There
mm,
are plants on the tables. There
right.
are pictures hanging on the wall. There's a
Mm,
cat licking itself in the fireplace,
yeah.
and, and even within that, um, I have, like someone talking on a video conversation. And that video call
Mm,
was simulated by having one AI create a character looking like she was on a video call,
Mm.
feeding that into a different AI that animated it a little bit,
Wow.
that I then imported into Second Life, which is a 3D environment creator,
That's awesome.
and formed that into the video screen of
Wow.
a terminal within this virtual spaceship, and created a video of that and then placed myself into it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I mean, so AI can definitely be used
Mm.
beyond what it initially puts out, and I think that's the real power of it.
Thanks to our sponsor, Manscaped, we have the best tools to offer for either yourself or if you're buying a gift for somebody else. Manscaped has everything that you need, whether it's getting the Platinum Package 4.0, that has loads of little presents, perfect for stocking stuffers. What's better than the gift of good hygiene and a few laughs? Manscaped offers a handful of their liquid formulation, shampoos, body washes, upstairs and downstairs deodorant, gels, exfoliants, absolutely everything that they could need to keep it clean. And again, one of the things we love about Manscaped is that it makes manscaping and men's hygiene so much simpler. I mean, you can just check right here. My beard had gotten pretty crazy, had been sick, had been the holidays, just let it grow, and it got pretty wild. But I was able to tame the beast with the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. Not only do they give you the tools that you need, they help make the experience of men's grooming easier and simpler so that you don't have to overthink it. You can just grab your gear and go. But there's also things like the Shears 2.0 if you're looking for a full kit for nail care with scissors, clippers, tweezers, and a file for the traveling man. There is the new Persevere Cologne, which brings a light, breezy, woodsy feel and gives that fresh tree scent even after the holidays are over. They also have come out with their body buffer, which, if you're still using a loofah that holds all that bacteria, gross, you can throw that out and get this new body scrubber, the body buffer, that feels smoother and acts tougher. And then, of course, like we talked about before, the Lawnmower 4.0 is my go-to. It is the electric razor with advanced skin-safe technology. It's a life changer and known for reducing nicks and cuts. Manscaped is here to make holiday shopping a blast by giving products that they'll love and make them laugh at the same time. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code SPACE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code SPACE, and Manscaped is the perfect gift that will be the holidays' biggest hit. So thank you, Manscaped, for being a sponsor. Really appreciate the partnership we have with them, and makes a great gift for the man in your life. Might even be you. It's okay to take care of yourself. So manscaped.com, 20% off free worldwide shipping, code word SPACE. Let's get back to the show. I love that, and I want to get back to AI. We went off at a bit of a tangent, but I want folks to learn a little bit more about your background now that we've talked about some pretty interesting stuff. Let's go back to your STEM origin story. Where did the passion for you to want to break down science education, like what started the path for you to get to where you are today?
Wow. Okay. Honestly, I don't remember ever not having a passion for STEM and for STEAM. And my ghost actually starts a few years before I was born. And my dad was an electronics genius. I mean, he was like the professor from Gilligan's Island. This guy could,
Nice.
take two turtle shells and a piece from the radio and build a nuclear reactor out of the thing. Okay. But he couldn't manage people well. And so he was an independent contractor, and he got a contract to design a bunch of power supplies, electronics for the Apollo project.
Hmm.
So he had to hire a lot of people quickly. This meant that he had to hire someone to supervise those people.
Hmm.
Well, he found this woman, Jean, and was just coming off the Redstone project, which had
Oh
recently ended.
yeah.
And so they met fell in love, built a whole mess of electronics for the shuttle. They actually got both of their names. They signed both their names inside of the power supply
Oh,
of the base of the LEM of Apollo 11.
oh my God, that's amazing.
So they were one of the first people to have their names on the moon, though it
Oh.
was totally undercover. They weren't supposed to do that.
I'm sure there were a
And
few of those for
yeah, yeah. And and so I just grew up around the space program, around science. And what's interesting, I was thinking about this recently, is that I do not ever once remember my father saying, let's sit down and learn this. Let's
Mm,
sit down and study how blank works.
right.
But what he did was, it was experiential.
Mm,
We built radio controlled airplanes, for instance,
cool.
by the dozen. And because of that, I
That's
learned aerodynamics.
yes.
You know, best way
Hmm.
to learn aerodynamics was by building airplanes that you could fly around the air or not.
Right. Right.
Depending on how well you
And you learned a lot.
you learned a lot, right? And learned about propulsion and Newton's laws by building model rockets.
Yeah.
And we always had a telescope that we took out all the time, and so it was pretty amazing. And I so he was a huge influence on me, and another huge influence on me as a young kid was in fact Carl Sagan.
Mm,
And, Cosmos came out when I was a little kid, and I just remember reading it and reading it and reading it over and over and over again.
yeah.
So many times I wore out the binding to four hardcover copies of the book.
Wow.
And of course the series came out, which was a huge hit. It was the first science series ever to
Yeah.
become such a huge hit. Cosmos, the book, was the first science book ever to sell 500,000 copies.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so, when I got older, I realized that what was so amazingly cool about Cosmos was that Carl Sagan was not sitting there saying, oh, well, the surface of Mars is approximately 25% iron oxide, accounting
Right.
for its reddish color.
Yeah.
And he was he was using the greatest technology of his time, which
Mm,
was television, to bring people to Mars.
yeah.
He would say, "Come walk with me. We're we're gonna strew
Yeah.
across the surface of the red planet
Hmm.
and walk up to the Viking landers."
That's awesome.
That
Yeah.
was something which had really never been done before.
Hmm.
And I am convinced that if Sagan were alive today, he would be enthralled by the idea of 3D environments,
Mm,
metaverses, and
yeah.
expanding that.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm seeking to do, is to use these environments and these technologies to humanize science education, tearing down another huge wall,
Mm.
another huge barrier to science education.
And
And
literally in some senses, right? Literally metaphorically.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and it's such a great tool. I mean, so communicating science is a very different thing than learning science in some
yeah.
ways, at least especially in the traditional sense. Like going to school to learn science does not necessarily mean that you can communicate it or that it's even communicated well to you, which was some of my experience,
Mhm.
which definitely is part of the reason why I podcast like I do now. Uh, but so that's an amazing background. That it's cool to think about. Your example seems very much like a great example of what happens if there is that scientific education available all the time, and that it's
Mm.
just a part of your daily experience, how much we could all learn from just doing and seeing what it does in real life.
Sure, sure. And and I hope that by by breaking down some of these as many barriers as possible
Mm,
to science education, by increasing the amount of knowledge that people have out there,
yeah.
um, it's certainly going to help deal with, I think, a lot of the really important issues that we have in the world today. But more importantly, it is not it's not so important to learn facts
Mm,
as it is to learn how to think critically.
mm. Is that?
And
Oh,
go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, and I think that critical thinking is one of the most important skills that could be imparted onto people today.
Absolutely. Do you think that's one of the barriers today that we need to almost refine and relearn?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and there are other ones too. I mean, I think another interesting one is a lot of people have the impression that science is boring.
Mm,
And I think that's a huge hurdle to be overcome.
mm,
And I think it's so important to, make science interesting
yeah.
and enjoyable for
Mm-hmm.
people, you know.
Totally.
Too many people now, I think, have this impression that education is something you do from age 6 to age 18 or 22 or whatever,
Right.
and then you forget about it after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or that, or it's something you do just while you're in school,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're currently going to school from, 3 to 7, whatever. Um, but the thing is that if you think about kids, all right, kids are natural scientists.
Mm.
They don't think about, oh, well, I'm going to not do this thing because I might learn something. You know,
Right. Right.
they're digging under rocks and,
Mm-hmm.
for
What's
the
this
most
do?
part.
What is
Yeah.
this? What is
And
that? Yeah.
yeah. And that is all, and asking questions, and
Yeah.
that's all science.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
is learning
and the W
science.
that almost never gets answered in traditional education is why. And that's one of the questions that kids ask all the time. Well, why would you do that? Why
And
that?
that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is one of the most important questions anyone can ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um Man, I'm very glad that we get to talk. This is very cool.
Yeah.
One thing that I was reading up that I heard you have a connection with the March
Mm,
for Science.
mm,
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
mm. I I'm gonna have to remember the year of this now. I believe it was 2017.
Hmm.
Um, it was a big March for Science, 400 odd March for Science events
Hmm.
around around the world. And at the time, I owned a store, a geek store. So I sold comic books and telescopes and fossils
It must have been
and
a blast.
magic cards. And I,
Yeah.
would have magic tournaments and
Oh, that's great.
weekly magic tournaments, weekly D&D sessions in my store.
Awesome.
Like, I got, oh yeah, I also got a collection of copyright free sci-fi movies from the 50s and 60s and would play those
Oh, that's amazing.
every week. So anyway, so it was beginning of 2017, I believe. And I'd heard that there was going to be a huge March for Science events. And
Hmm.
so I started looking, and ones around me. I was in Brattleboro, Vermont at the time,
Hmm.
which for those who don't know is a town of about 12,000 people, located right about where Vermont, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire all meet. And so I looked, and one was, hour and a half away from me in one direction. The other one, next closest to me, was 3 hours in the other direction.
Hmm.
And I just thought, well, if nobody's doing this here, I have to make this happen.
Awesome.
So so I wound up like calling the organization, and they actually connected me with Bill McKibben, for God's sakes.
Wow.
So I got to like talk with like one of the greatest environmentalists of our age on the
Crazy.
phone,
Yeah.
planning this event. And oh my goodness, it was so much fun. I invited all sorts of farmers and developers. I had a wildlife refuge come into the store, and they brought, this huge hawk into this, 700 square foot store. The place had a capacity of 45 people, I think, and there were over 400 people showed up.
That's awesome.
It was just nuts. And there was, people giving away organic foods and videos. Oh, it was a whole lot of fun, and
That's awesome.
raised a good amount of money for environmental causes.
That's great.
It,
So we attended that here in Boston that
Mhm.
year and a few years after that. So it was a cool connection where I was like, oh, I know that. I wonder what the connection was. So you helped organize the one in Vermont. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Met some
and
interesting people. That's very cool.
yeah, it was great fun. It was a really good, it was a great experience.
That's great. So tell us about what you're doing now with Cosmic Companion and all these 3D environments that you're living in and teaching through.
Sure. I love the concept of app smashing,
Hmm.
taking things, creating things in one app, exporting them into another, turning them into something else, exporting them to a third app, building that on, and
Hmm.
creating all these things which couldn't exist if I were limiting myself to just one media um, or one way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so we have a weekly show, The Cosmic Companion. It's about a half-hour show every week. And I interview some amazing scientists, authors, developers from around the globe.
Hmm.
And that's available both in audio and video formats. And of course, there's all sorts of extra jokes and Easter eggs and that sort of thing. And in
Hmm.
the video, last episode created was a look at the year 2023 in astronomy. It was called Space 2023,
Hmm.
and did the whole beginning like a parody of Space 1999.
Oh, that's great. I just listened to it. I'll have to go back and watch it now. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. And we've also developing these 3D environments within Second Life, which, like I
Hmm.
said, is a metaverse and a 3D environment that people can go in. It's free to go in there. It's free to create. There are many free avatars
Hmm.
you can develop. You go in, you can walk around a moon base, walk around a media room, and developing a 3D interactive environment of a lava planet, an
Hmm.
exoplanet. So you can, walk around this exoplanet and learn about geology from a talking rock.
Nice.
And so I'm trying to merge these technologies along with AI and with talking avatars and text to speech, and
Hmm.
bringing in different ways of learning and different ways of creating
Hmm.
in an effort to make science fun and accessible to everyone.
That's awesome. It's so cool one of the great things about this podcast is it helps me connect with folks like yourself and who have all
Mm,
their own ways of trying to like enjoy science, do science, communicate it, teach it. Like it's so cool to see everyone's technique. And what's interesting is it's the same thing that I think most people, if they're interested in STEM, should or STEAM or whatever, is just start with what excites you. Is there something
exactly.
that just like you're like I don't know what it is about that, but I really like it. Just go all in. Just
Hmm.
like see what you learn, and then you'll pick something else up, and you'll go from there. Like for your journey, like where did it start? I mean, your dad was teaching you electronics as you were younger. What was like your did you go for school for something?
Oh,
Like what was
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, let's see. I actually started after high school. I was obsessed with art and music
Mm.
for a while, which is why I've always loved, STEAM.
Mm.
Is one of the reasons I love the creativity and the intellectual exercise
Yeah.
of music and art and acting and you
Mm.
know. And so I my first college I went to was actually Bennington College for her summer for
Mm.
art.
Nice.
And but by my 20s, I had started to manage a science and nature store,
Oh.
and just sold a lot of telescopes. Um, and I held hundreds easily of star parties for people
Oh,
where I'd
cool.
bring a bunch of telescopes out. And, I mean, store I was working for had hundreds of telescopes. So I bring,
Yeah.
six, eight, 10 of them out,
That's awesome.
out to a field somewhere and teach people about eclipses while one was going on,
That's so cool.
and I started writing my first astronomy column about that time for the local newspaper, and that caught on with a couple of other newspapers. And so I've worked in sciences in some different ways.
Mm.
And then just as I was closing that up, I entered college, full time matriculated,
Mm.
college for the first time. And I remember that because I was in the town of Keene, New Hampshire, best known for having a couple of scenes shot for Jumanji. Uh,
Great movie.
I the college there did not have an astronomy program,
Hmm.
so the closest I could come was either um, physics and mathematics or physics and chemistry.
Hmm.
And I'd heard things about the fantastic astronomy professor there, so I immediately started taking classes under him. And so one day in class he made an artificial comet, which of course is a dirty snowball
Oh.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
added water ice and water and dry ice and ammonia and all this stuff and coal,
Oh, that's
crushed
sweet.
up charcoal and mixed it all up. This
Yeah.
thing started bubbling and boiling and sublimating, sending steam off everywhere,
Yeah.
and it just made this room smell awful. And I thought to myself, chemistry it is. So, I
Uh,
wound up majoring in physics and chemistry, and I picked up a minor in history.
mm.
And It was kind of fun is that the school hired me pretty quickly to teach night classes
Mm.
in astronomy, explaining what had just been said in the astronomy class that
Oh,
day.
interesting.
you know, so and it was just a different way of giving kids different way of looking at things,
Yeah, totally.
and like instead of saying, okay, well, this is Bean's law, and here's the equation for it, and we see as this variable goes upwards, this one's going to tend downward, blah 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 blah. And then I would, come in at night and be like, okay, this is Bean's law. You ever seen metal stuck into a fire?
Yeah.
And just try to give
Yeah, the
kids a
simple.
different
Yeah,
way of looking at things.
totally.
And so that's
You must have
really
been a
where
breath of fresh air for the administration
um,
and the kids taking the classes.
let's hope so, at least for some of them, right?
Well, that's all you can hope for.
Right, right. And so that's really where I honed my skills at teaching, um, at bringing a more popular way of learning, let's say,
Yeah.
to science education while teaching
Hmm.
really, really good science. And let's see, I made, right after that, I spent years just writing thousands of science articles,
Hmm.
tens of thousands of science articles. I was churning out, Asimov level, production for a
That's
while, for,
impressive.
years on end.
uh,
And, and again, they were, popular articles. And so,
cool.
one
Sharpening your
day,
teeth and your skills to communicate.
yeah,
Different mediums.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then 2018, is that right? I believe it was 2018 or 2017, 2017. I decided, you know what? If I can write all these articles, science articles for other people, I can write them for myself.
Yeah.
So and then I started doing the same sort. I came up with the name, the Cosmic Companion. Starting at first, it was all based on science and
Hmm.
science articles and about astronomy and medicine, what have you. And then I was writing a story having to do with some professors at the University of Arizona, where I
Hmm.
live. I live in Tucson now, and they were so close to my house. I, emailed and said, "Hey, I'm writing an article about your work. You want to meet up and have lunch and you know
Nice.
and record some stuff." And so I wound up recording them. And then I thought, man, this would be great for a podcast. And so then I started interviewing, scientists, um and so that's how the podcast thing started.
Hmm.
And then of course, the whole and then I started getting into video because that was
Hmm.
hot,
Yep.
and it still is. Um
Yeah, more and
and
more.
then of course this whole little thing happened right around the beginning of 2020 called COVID.
Yeah.
And so that just inspired me to just keep, building the show and,
Hmm.
working from home and making the best show I can possibly make, and use every talent and every technology I can lay my hands on to
I love it.
bring science to the world.
That's so cool. What a journey, man. I mean, it's yeah, the 2018, and then how fast things have changed since then. I mean, I can't believe it's four full years between. No, what's that for you?
Great.
Yeah, that's four, three. So
Yeah.
crazy. It's crazy how
Yeah.
much things have changed, and even just like this platform that we're recording on Zoom has changed
Yeah.
so much. The audio is completely through this on this episode. It's wild.
Right.
Um, yeah, no, and I branched out in the year of the pandemic doing interviews and speaking with people. This is uh, it's been a really good learning experience. Um, for you, for your process, if you don't mind breaking into that a little bit,
Oh,
um,
please. I
is
like to learn something about my process.
well, it's interesting because like I know everyone has their own creative process, and I think it's interesting when someone who has a scientific, let's play around with stuff and mess with stuff, and you're also in the creative side, the full steam aspect, right? Like, are those the same? are those, do you see them as separate? Do they work in tandem, or is it just this is you just go into it and you kind of just work through it more in like an ancient world, like a what's the word I'm looking for? Um, just the ether, right? Like, is it just working through you in a classical sense?
It used to depend more on the day,
Hmm,
like especially when I was, writing a lot, for a long time I was writing like 5 articles a day.
that's a lot.
That's a hell of a lot.
So you're
Yeah.
writing, you're drafting, you're editing, and then you're
Yeah.
publishing it in five in a
Yeah.
day. Wow,
Well, I had an editor there, so I'd give it a
that's
once
great.
over and then shove it off to her, but it
That's
was still
still
crazy.
that's still a lot of work.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Wow, that's hardcore.
right. And so, I mean, there were times, and so that's a really good way to learn how to get over writer's block.
Yeah, yeah. No choice. Figure it out.
You write something, you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
And um, and so I think that was a huge
Mm,
lesson for me in like how to get over any sort of writer's block or anything like that is
yeah.
just put down something, just
Mm,
create something. It may not be great, it may not wind up in the final product.
yeah.
Create, hit the freaking type, hit that freaking keyboard, or
Yeah.
stroke
Yeah.
those paints or make those numbers do things on a whiteboard,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
and so I think that's really important. But I think what I do today is I I have both a combination of um of regularity and a segment of an aspect of improvisation.
Mm,
Okay. Like
yeah.
I swear by whiteboards. I have one, two, three, four, five, at least 5 whiteboards just in view of me right now.
Nice. Nice.
Okay. And so one of them I just have the days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I have
Mm,
just a couple of things underneath each day.
mm,
And if I get those couple of things done, the show's going to get made. Things are going to happen.
yeah.
But it also doesn't overwhelm me. So, each day might have, 4 hours of stuff on it.
Right.
So that when things go westward like they so often do,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's some buffer in there. And
Hmm.
so, like one of the days, Monday and Tuesday, is reserved for writing the script for the shows on those
Mm,
2 days. And so, like when I go to write so I know that on Mondays and Tuesdays, I'm going to be sitting there writing the script for the show.
mm,
Uh, but I don't force myself to start off at the same place every time,
right.
when I
Right.
get inspiration to write about maybe this first part of the show, great, and then I'll waste some time, writing out if you enjoyed this episode, please visit the
Yeah.
Cosmic Companion. There has to be in there for the teleprompter anyway.
Yep.
But but for me, what works is this combination of regularity and improvisation.
Yeah. I love that. I picked that up through listening to podcasts that were a lot of stand up comedy and just like they don't prepare almost anything. So,
Right.
and I have a jazz music background. I was a jazz trumpet player, so the improv thing, I totally get that. Um, and it's interesting. I'm just learning this, what you're talking about. This, I'm creating my own version of that as I do this outside of my day job as an engineer. So
Mhm.
it's cool. I will have questions for sure if you don't mind feeling them. But that's cool to
Please.
learn how where you've gotten to with this and that it's working. That's awesome.
Yeah, what works for me might not necessarily work for others.
Absolutely.
Individual results may vary.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about 2022. Let's just like a quick review. What's some of the stuff that really excited you about the last year?
In my own
For yeah,
work or
from your
others.
lens or whatever. Yeah, I guess because it's all science related in some way. So,
Oh
Space would
no.
be great if you have any of those too.
Oh, of course. I mean, we just, and of course, Christmas Day 2021, just before 2022 started, of course, James Webb Space Telescope launched
Glorious
perfectly.
launch. Yep.
And
Right out of French Guiana.
that instrument has just been amazing. I think
Yeah.
it's just gonna do so much to spread knowledge of astronomy
Mm-hmm.
and love of science among
Yeah.
people. I think that's
Yes.
one of
The,
its most vital
mhm.
functions.
And I was a little concerned about the volume of data, both in getting it, but also processing it and releasing it. But I think the team has done a great job at
Oh, they
giving
have.
us like a constant feed. It's wild.
Right, right. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are of course some, lesser known web pages where you can get, a lot of the rawer, more raw
Yes.
data from web. So,
Yeah,
there's an awful lot out there for people to play with as well.
definitely.
And and of course, Artemis as
Yeah.
well. The launch of Artemis 1 toward the end of the year, that was incredible.
Mm.
And I think that human spaceflight is one of the most important things that we can do
Yeah.
as a society. You know, it there's what's called the overview effect,
Yeah.
you know, where almost everyone who goes into space suddenly sees our planet from, up above, where there are no national borders.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't wars, largely visible, or and it gives people who go to space a feeling and a recognition of the unity of humanity,
Yeah.
that we're all one species.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as more people experience space, it that feeling is going to permeate our species to a greater degree. And I think that could be a major shift in how we look at one another.
Definitely. How does the private side of space with, let's say, Virgin Galactic and Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, like those quick jumps past the Kármán line and back? What do those bring to the table for human spaceflight, in your opinion?
They have a purpose,
Mm.
and their purpose is going to be probably these, low flight, earth to earth
Mm.
type things. Um, but if you look at it now, even Musk, all right, now SpaceX has never yet flown a human rated spacecraft more than 0.15% of the way to the moon.
Mm.
All right. Roughly 1/7 of 1%
Yep.
of the way to the moon. And NASA just flew rings around it, literally.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But these flights to low Earth orbit, to these orbiting hotels, will provide a service. And one of those services is going to be providing space flight to the ordinary person.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it's not
the
going to
first,
be a moon ticket unless you're lucky enough to go on like Starship or something like that for Dear Moon. It's not happening for the everyday person for a while.
probably not for a while. No,
Yeah.
no. But of course, once you get enough people, even in low Earth orbit,
Mm.
leaving from low Earth orbit to the moon is much easier than
Yeah.
taking off through all that thick atmosphere.
True. Very
The
true.
whole the whole first stage of a rocket typically, like, you think about the Saturn V rocket,
Yeah.
that whole first stage of it, for the most part, is nothing but a gas tank
Yeah.
to provide enough fuel for these 5 huge F1 engines, whatever, to lift that thing through the air,
Yeah.
you know, and it shucked off.
Yeah.
And, the solid rocket boosters on the shuttle provided the exact same
Mm.
service. They were the equivalent of that first stage,
Right.
you know. So if you can get enough people living in Earth orbit for enough time,
Mm.
then getting from there to the moon is much less of a jump than it is today.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And we're gonna have an interesting convergence where, if that progress continues, which I really hope it does for low Earth orbit and these orbiting hotels and I guess science parks, they will also be happening while Artemis is setting up the gateway and
Yes,
all the other highways, for lack of a better word,
it's a
that
great
we're
word.
gonna need. Thanks, for making this routine. I think when we talk about the gap, and it's been talked about for many years, but the gap between what we did for the Apollo program and what we need to do to make it regular is there's so much that needs to be done and made, but more importantly, tested. Because if we don't put ourselves in that environment, simulation only goes so far. And to your point earlier about human spaceflight, if the humans aren't doing this, then it just doesn't have the oomph or the why or the meaning for the amount of money that it costs to do it and the time and sacrifice that it takes to do it.
Space is hard, and there's a lot of sacrifice to making that happen, financial,
Mm-hmm.
personal, and there's already, been 22, 23 people who have died in space, counting
Mm,
Apollo 1. And
right.
um, but the opportunities that that provides are incredible. Okay. Imagine we're now living 150 years from now. Okay. 2173. Now, there's a 7-year-old girl living on Mars. All right. Neither she nor her parents have ever once stepped on the face of Earth.
Crazy.
Her great grandparents came to the red planet,
That is pretty cool.
all right. So now, she hears talk among the adults of some border skirmish on, between two countries on Earth, or,
Mm.
a
Oh, I
Uber
love.
Twitter feud, whatever it
Yes.
is those days, right?
Yep.
What is that? What is that going to matter to her?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Border skirmish is the best way you could have described that. I love that. It's
Yeah.
foreign enough of a description that I had to think for a second. It's like, oh yeah, what is that?
Yeah. Back in 63, is that right? China and the Soviet Union had a series of border skirmishes which left a few hundred people dead,
Mm,
and nearly led to a nuclear war between the two. Um, and most people don't know of it because it was
yeah.
overshadowed by the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened around the same
Oh wow,
time,
that was all at the same time.
roughly,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
within a few months. And so my question is, think about this, 7-year-old girl, 150 years from now. All right. The 3D, the building she's living in was created by, 3D printers, you know,
Mm-hmm.
developed, let's say, by the United States, and the air filters are from the Chinese, and the
Mm-hmm.
water filters are supplied by Russians. And whose
Yeah.
side, whose side is anyone going to take in that? Would you rather live without your water or without your air?
Right. Right.
You know? you're going to play that fine line right down the middle, and it's only that interdependence that could really bring about the end of nationalism.
Mm, I love that. Yeah, the International Space Station is a great example
Yes.
of even when everything goes haywire here on the planet, we still had everyone. Well, China's not involved in that scenario, but at
No.
least the parties against each other, the U.S. and Russia, being and the European agency folks, but like you had them all working together. Still, there was still an example somewhere of us all
Mhm,
working together, and to
mhm.
think about what it would have been like even without that tiny example, almost to have as the floodgates of just war and going against each other. I think it's beautiful. It's definitely not the great time, especially with the Soyuz having the issue it has currently and us not having a return vehicle. But all that being said, we're still working together up there.
Right, right. And, the Russians have talked about, pulling out of the ISS, and then they were not going to, and then they were
Mm.
going to. And, but, I've actually read English translations of some of the meetings between Roscosmos and Vladimir Putin.
Mm.
And Putin has no vision about
Mm.
space whatsoever.
Mm.
You know, um, they would be saying, oh, we have these plans for Lunar 25 to return to the moon and pick up samples and do this. And do you have any questions? Yet.
Mm.
Well, oh, we're working on this other project as well. We'd like to explore Venus. We'd like to. Do you have any questions? Yet. It just
Yeah.
goes like this for like pages upon pages.
Yeah.
And so, of course, one of the problems that we're facing, I think, in most countries are leaders with a real lack of vision,
Mm.
especially when it comes to science
Mm.
and a new future for the human race.
Yeah. The lack of scientific understanding. Never mind, like you were saying, like the vision. Vision would be fantastic, but even understanding would be great as well, or councils to inform and wanting to get informed on the latest would be great. But yeah, would love more of that from our leaders all around.
Hmm. But now this is really cool. Now we just talked about how space exploration and living on other worlds is likely to end nationalism.
Mm.
And all right. And what's going to also happen is that um, currencies,
Mm.
mores, and the social obligations, many social obligations that we adhere to today, are going to disappear.
Mm.
All right, because people are just going to be literally too far removed from it,
Yeah.
and space is extremely hard, and everybody's going to have a choice between getting along or dying.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is likely to start happening in the next few decades.
Mm.
All right. We've already had a permanent habitation aboard the International Space Station for 22 years,
Yep. Consistently manned or
consistently
crewed, I
crewed.
should say.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that should only increase.
Yeah.
Um, and now, so we're going to have this huge shift, this huge paradigm shift happening
Mm.
starting in just a few decades. And right around the same time, we are likely to find the first evidence of life on other worlds.
Mm.
All right. The James Webb Telescope started examining the TRAPPIST-1 system in its
Yeah.
first week of observations.
Yeah.
NASA knows to look carefully at TRAPPIST-1. They are dedicating themselves to studying the 7 planets in that system to such a degree that 1/8, 12.5% of all time scheduled for Webb
Mm.
is scheduled to look at just these 7 planets.
That's awesome. I'm so
All
happy to
right.
hear that.
Yeah. And what they can do now is you look for light that's come through the atmosphere from a star through the atmosphere of an exoplanet, and you break that light up into its spectrum of colors.
Mm,
And you can tell, through spectroscopy what chemicals were in that atmosphere.
yeah.
And some chemicals just shouldn't be there. There should
Yeah.
not be as much oxygen in our atmosphere as there is.
Mm,
There should not be as much methane. And when we look and see excesses of those chemicals, they can give us an idea that that's not an equilibrium. Something's whacking that out, and it could
mm,
be some geological process.
right.
But man, at some point, the evidence is just going to be built up in so many different ways
Yeah.
that the evidence of life is really going to become apparent in the next few decades as well, next couple of decades, if not the next couple of years.
This is so exciting.
And that's going to radically change our views of our place in the universe.
Mm,
Now, we're going to throw a third widget into that. All right. Artificial intelligence, where
mm,
we started this whole thing. All right. Where artificial intelligence is also likely to reach consciousness
mm.
right about the same time that these other two things happen. So within the next 20, 30 years, we're going to be a spacefaring species for the first time in large numbers. We're going to find life on other worlds, and our own creation, artificial intelligence, could very likely become its own life form, forever changing what we even think of as life.
Mm.
And those three events together are all going to be happening at right about the same time.
That's
And it's
crazy.
going to change our species so much that I like to call this event the Nexus.
Mm.
And it's a perfect storm of coming events that I think will prove to be even greater change than when or as late, at least as great of a change as when our distant hominid ancestors came down out of the trees.
It's a wild time. And to
And
think about the order of those things happening and how many different scenarios could happen if one comes before the other or if one is too delayed. My mind was just running through all the different, you know, sci-fi scenarios of how does this form into our next step when the nexus occurs.
right, right.
Yeah,
And it's incredible.
fascinating.
It's almost
Fascinating.
impossible to tell how things will wind up at the end of this and at the other side of this, even in a few decades.
Mm.
And it's within the lifetime of many people listening to this show.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be a very exciting next few decades, to say the least. We will not be
Absolutely.
bored, that is for sure. Uh, James, this has been an incredible talk. I want to close this out here, just
Hmm.
because this is a great listenable podcast. I would love to have you on another time if
I'd
if
love
you're
to come
welcome to.
back.
That would be great.
Love
I'd
to.
love to dive into maybe even more of the future. Right? I think we did a great
Yeah.
job laying down the groundwork. One of the things that I'm very excited about in the near future is manufacturing in space. It's
Yes.
the bet I'm making on my career and the position I'm putting
Mm-hmm.
myself into, where, you know, like you were saying, the first stage rocket, if we're able to build things in space, all the limits that we have with what we create to travel the void and to other planets, it changes that whole perspective and the materials we would use, the requirements of the mission. I mean, everything opens up from what was once restricted. Um, what what are you looking forward to with AI and 3D environments, simulation environments for preparing us for, I'd say probably the next 10, 20 years.
And there's just so much out there. I mean, I think one of the most important things we can do with AI and with these 3D environments is to imagine possible other futures.
Hmm.
All right. And that was that used to be the prerogative of science fiction
Yeah.
solely. We could look at we could watch Star Trek and imagine, a time when, the doctor just, goes with this little device and isn't, poking and prodding us with needles for 20 minutes.
Yep.
Um, so I think that we really have, but now we can use 3D environments and metaverses
Hmm.
to imagine different ways of doing things, different systems we could design and build,
Hmm.
and different ways of building them.
Hmm.
Let's, think of, some ways that we could put 3D printers on the moon
Yeah.
and build a whole mess of habitations before
Hmm.
anyone ever steps foot.
Right. And prepare. Like, there's so much time in between. And I think this is a challenge of the space program in the last 10, 20 years. NASA by itself is so limited by the whim of the presidencies and the
Mhm.
political changes. It's used as a political football often. So I think we find ourselves with a great opportunity where the private sector is getting involved, much like the early days of the plane and so
Yes.
many other technologies. We have that backup plan that we never had before.
Hmm.
So I think it makes that way more possible than it ever did before.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes it more
Absolutely.
resilient
Right.
to to what
Right. And more
happens in life.
flexible,
And flexible, yeah, very true.
you know,
Yeah.
just, and I think it's vitally important that we have both, these grandiose missions
Yeah.
of NASA and ESA and JAXA and ISRO and all the nations,
Mhm.
who are, sending out probes to Pluto
Yeah.
and Jupiter and.
Mhm.
Um, but we also need to have um, access for regular people to be able to, you know,
Yeah.
journey up, uh, you know, journey up through the atmosphere and come back and tell all the people, my God, this is a beautiful blue marble down here, and
Yeah.
we're all wonderful, and
Yeah.
and and I think it's one of the most important things that we can really do as a species.
I couldn't agree more. Uh James, thank you for coming on. Do you have any last words for the folks? I know there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast that fit into that everyone category in the respect that they don't work in STEM at the moment, or they're working at getting to their job that they'd love to be in, or they just never thought that science could be something they could get into. What last words do you have for those folks?
Science needs everyone. I mean, everyone in science has different skills, different backgrounds, different weaknesses. And you don't have to be a math whiz to work in astronomy.
Yeah.
Don't need to know, you don't need to know the latest coding language to help develop
Right.
things.
Right.
Um, and astronomy, especially, is known for having uh, a lot of um, a lot of amateurs contributing real world science
Yeah.
to it, and citizen science is a great thing. If someone's working at a daytime job, but still feels like looking through a few frames of plant growth and seeing if
Mm.
and helping scientists track down the effects of climate change, let's say.
Mm.
It's a great thing to do. It
Yeah.
is. And science needs you. Science needs communicators. Science needs people with a good eye.
Yeah.
Science needs everyone. Um, and if you want to do science, just find something you love.
Mm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and there's quite often a way of some doing something really constructive. It's just there's nothing I would rather do with my life than to do science and bring it to others.
You're an inspiration, James. I have enjoyed talking to you tremendously today. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
so
coming
much,
on.
Alex. It was really wonderful talking with you.
Wow. Until next time, everybody, spread love and spread science. Be well, live long and prosper, and we'll see you on the next episode of Today in Space. Thanks.
LLOP.